November is the month to remember in college football. It's when championships are won and lost. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, breaking down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis based on your participation. We appreciate you being here. Please like the video, even if you don't agree with me, if you enjoy the content and the great discussion. Hey, do that. Please like the video, subscribe here at the Voice of College Football as well. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. We are breaking down the Big Ten and all the various tie-breaking scenarios. They are many, so let's dive right into it with the Big Ten Eastern Division, the one that has gained the most focus during the offseason because there was this thought that, wow, if Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State all split the games against each other, we could not only have a tie for the division championship, a three-way tie, we could also have a very messy scenario for the College Football Playoff Committee in trying to choose between 3 11-1 teams, one, of course, that would advance to the Big Ten championship game. Let's look at first at the division race. Ohio State and Michigan, a perfect 5-0. Penn State 4-1 with the loss in the first of three titanic matchups between the three. Ohio State over Penn State 20-12. So to create a three-way tie, Penn State would have to win on November 11th when Michigan comes to town. If Michigan wins against Penn State, then we've got a clear-cut division championship game, the game, November 25th, Ohio State at Michigan. If Penn State pulls off the upset against Michigan, then Ohio State holds the division. If they defeat Michigan, the Buckeyes would be the only 9-0 team. But if Michigan beats Ohio State after losing to Penn State, then we've got that three-way tie. So if you go through all the tie-breaking situations in the Big Ten, basically all of them have to do with assuming that one or more of those teams have lost to other teams. But Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State don't lose to anybody else in the Big Ten. Therefore, we have to cross off all of these tiebreakers on down the list, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, because they never lose to anyone else. So they have the same record against everybody else, undefeated. Consider this. This is crazy. Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State are a combined 38-0 against the rest of the Big Ten since the final weekend of 2021. They are completely dominating the conference. So the next tiebreaker that comes into play is their opponents' record, combined record out of the Big Ten Western Division. So their non-division opponents' record. Everybody in the Big Ten plays 3 non-division opponents. And for Ohio State this season, it's Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Purdue. Those 3 teams combined are currently 7-8 in the conference. For Michigan, it's Minnesota, Nebraska, and Purdue. Those 3 teams are combined 7-8. Penn State has played Iowa, Northwestern, and Illinois. They are a combined 6-9 currently. My projections for these 3 records currently would be that Ohio State, facing Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Purdue, would have a 14-13 record from those 3 opponents out of the Western Division. For Michigan, I've got Minnesota and Nebraska finishing at 5-4, Purdue at 3-6. So they would have a combined record of 13-14. Penn State has Iowa, Northwestern, and Illinois. I've got those 3 teams at 6-3, 3-6, 3-6, finishing at 12-15. So the Buckeyes would win that tiebreaker by 1 game over Michigan, 14-13 over 13-14. And with all the hype and all the attention and all the focus given to the East for obvious reasons, those are the playoff contenders and the better teams and the elite teams in college football, it's more likely that the Big Ten West is going to finish in a 3-way tie. Because if you look at the East, there's only one way that there's going to be a 3-way tie. Penn State has to defeat Michigan, and then Michigan has to beat Ohio State. But in the West, there's a zillion possibilities of a 3-way tie. You've got Minnesota, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Iowa all at 3-2. Minnesota's got the head-to-head on Iowa and Nebraska. That's key for the Gophers. Iowa's got a head-to-head against Wisconsin. Wisconsin and Nebraska have some work to do because they don't have the head-to-head on anyone in this grouping. Now let's look at the remaining schedule for the 4 contenders here. Minnesota plays Illinois this Saturday. They go to Purdue. They go to Ohio State. Difficult, of course. And then they've got Wisconsin in the annual battle for Paul Bunyan's axe. Those teams in the Big Ten are 10-10 currently. Iowa's got what appears to be a little bit lighter of a ride because they don't have to play Ohio State, and especially on the road. They've got Northwestern at Wrigley Field, Rutgers, and Illinois at home, and then they go to Nebraska in the annual rivalry game to finish the season at Memorial Stadium. Those four opponents in the Big Ten right now are 9-11. For Wisconsin, they go to Bloomington to take on the Hoosiers. Then they've got back-to-back home games against Northwestern and Nebraska. Then they finish up at Minnesota. Those four teams collectively in the Big Ten are 8-12. And then we've got Nebraska going to Michigan State. They've got Maryland at home. They go to Wisconsin. Then they've got Iowa at home. And then if we want to throw Northwestern into the mix, only one game back, but since they've got to climb over a number of other teams, it's going to be difficult for Northwestern. But they do have the head-to-head win over Minnesota. That's key. Of course, they've got to win this game against Iowa. Then they go to Wisconsin. They've got Purdue, and then they finish up at Illinois. So those four remaining opponents for the Wildcats are collectively 8-12 in the Big Ten. So just like our exercise with the Big Ten Eastern Division teams, let's look at the West and see who's playing the most difficult schedule out of the Big Ten East. And it's definitely Minnesota. They've already played Michigan. They've got Ohio State coming up. Minnesota has also played Michigan State. So you add all that up, 5-0, 5-0, and 0-5. And those three opponents are currently 10-5. For Iowa, they've defeated Michigan State. They lost to Penn State. They also have Rutgers coming up. Those three teams are 8-7. For Wisconsin, it's Ohio State, it's Indiana, and it's Rutgers. Add all those teams up. They are currently 8-7. For Nebraska, they played Michigan 5-0, Michigan State 0-5, and Maryland 2-3. Add that up to 7 wins and 8 losses for Nebraska's 3 Eastern Division opponents. But again, there's a lot of football to be played. That's only 15 games total. And the final result's going to be 27, so just slightly more than 50% of the games have already been played. So much to decide in terms of non-division opponents' strength of schedule and their composite record. Let's go deeper into the tie-breaking rules in the Big Ten to see if there is a tie between 3 teams in terms of non-division opponents' composite record, where it goes from there. So we pick up the tiebreaker rules at number 6. The records of the 3 or more teams will be compared against the highest placed non-divisional teams in their division order of finish. So if we're looking at the Big Ten Western Division, they are going to be matched up against the East. So it says here in point A, when arriving at a group of tied teams while comparing records, use each team's record against the collective tied teams as a group rather than record against the individual teams. I interpret that as meaning if there are 3 teams tied for a particular place in the other division, then you don't try to differentiate those teams and which place they finished in. You take all of them as a group, and then you take, let's say, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota tie for the Big Ten Western Division lead. You take their records against those teams in the Big Ten Eastern Division from top to bottom. But if there is a group of teams, let's say, that are 5-4, then you take that collective record against those teams and you just don't pick them apart one by one. Hopefully that made sense. I had to read through this about 18 times for it to click at a certain level, because B then says when comparing records against a single team or a group of teams, the record will prevail even if the number of games played against the team or group are unequal. And that makes sense because they only play 3 of the 7 teams in the other division, so the records are not going to be equal as they are compared against groups of teams going from the best team in the Big Ten East, for example, all the way to the bottom. If that still turns out to be a tie, then we get to point number 7 where it says best overall winning percentage wins. Minnesota lost a non-conference game to North Carolina. Wisconsin lost a non-conference game to Washington State. Nebraska lost its non-conference game. See the pattern here. The Big Ten West just isn't very good. Nebraska lost to Colorado. Iowa is the team that's unblemished outside the conference. having defeated Iowa State in its one Power 5 opponent. All right. I want to see chaos. I want to see a mess, especially in the Big Ten Western Division. That would be fun. All right. We have just begun to go through the various conference and division races here at the Voice of College Football because we've gotten to a point in the season where these things matter. 4 games left, so much of it is going to be determined on the field. But if you like chaos, then you want to see these rules be implemented. If you want to see what happens on the field determine it, then you're not rooting for ties here because really the tie-breaking system, does it truly differentiate the better team? No, absolutely not. It does not. It's a ridiculous differentiation to say, well, that team played 3 teams that went 14-13 in the other division, and this team played 3 teams that went 13-14. Therefore, they are the better team, Team A, and so they are going to the Big Ten championship game. We need to implement a strength of schedule, strength of record in particular is where I'm going, and point differential, all of that, game control to measure the dominance of those teams against the rest of the Big Ten. That would be the way I would go once we get to a logical point in the tie-breaking system where it no longer is really measuring a team's value or strength or quality of their performance. Appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. We break down the game we all love each and every day with you. And please continue to join us. I'm going to attempt to go through the ACC, the SEC, and, of course, the Big 12 and the Pac-12 this week right here at the Voice of College Football.